the uncertainty around the classics of the pipeline that I have and the quality of the pipeline and the realness of the pipeline and how much of it is fabricated. And for this deal I have in the pipe, is this really the value of it? Is this really where it sits within the deal life cycle? Is this really the close date or not? And I think what a lot of our leaders are seeing is deals slipping, both in terms of their close date, in terms of the value, like some leakage in terms of the amount of the opportunity. So I think they're dealing with this increased uncertainty, and we know what that does to us as humans. We don't like uncertainty. We like predictability, particularly as a sales leader, when you're forecasting.
Welcome back to the B2B Playbook, where we believe that great go-to-market is built on people, not platforms. Today, we are joined by Phil Cleary, a veteran revenue leader with over 20 years at Salesforce, where he currently coaches and enables sales leaders and teams across APAC. Phil has led sales enablement at Salesforce in both EMEA and APAC for over 15 years, building programs that equip sellers with the skills, confidence, and methodology to perform in today's complex markets. He's also the co-lead of the Revenue Enablement Society Sydney chapter, a global community where practitioners share best practices and learn how to bridge strategy with real operational execution. Phil brings a rare blend of frontline experience, coaching insight, and enablement strategy, and is always focused on how revenue teams actually adopt change, not just design frameworks. So today, we are incredibly excited to have him on the show, together with Adam Mandarovich, co-founder of CRO School and creator of Closed Circuit Selling. Phil, thank you so much for joining us.
Yes. Hi, George. Hi, Adam. Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
And Adam, thank you as always for joining us too.
I'm surprised I got to thank you.
Love it. Look, Phil, we met at the Revenue Enablement Society a couple of months ago. Yeah. And after speaking to you, Adam and I really felt that we had to get you on this podcast because I think you add a whole other layer to the conversation that Adam and I have been having almost the whole year around where go-to-market needs to move in 2026 and beyond, and where teams might be limited. And I think one angle that you really bring is the way that you're able to enable change across an organization. That's something I really want to get into. But I'd just like to start sort of high level, because you've been around for quite a long time and you work with quite a lot of teams. I'd love to know, from where you sit, what are revenue leaders most worried about right now, and how is that fear showing up?
Great question. And again, thanks for having me on this topic. It's something that I hear a lot about, not only my day job, working with Salesforce, through the Revenue Enablement Society, and engaging with lots of other folks that are trying to drive behavioral change within their teams as well. I coach some folks outside of the company as well on a sort of a private basis. And so there's a really kind of common theme I see coming through at the moment, which I think will resonate with your leaders, which is this broader sort of sense of the category of uncertainty. And there's the uncertainty around the classics of the pipeline that I have and the quality of the pipeline and the realness of the pipeline and how much of it is fabricated. And for this deal I have in the pipe, is this really the value of it? Is this really where it sits within the deal life cycle? Is this really the close date or not? And I think what a lot of our leaders are seeing is deals slipping, both in terms of their close date, in terms of the value, like some leakage in terms of the amount of the opportunity. So I think they're dealing with this increased uncertainty, and we know what that does to us as humans. We don't like uncertainty. We like predictability, particularly as a sales leader when you're forecasting. I think the other thing around uncertainty is the advent of AI, right? Like, we have to, within the first 2 minutes of our conversation, bring up AI and talk about it. And if I'm a sales leader, how much AI, what kind of AI do I want to bring into the deal? How much is enough or not enough or too much for my seller to use as part of their selling pursuit, to get them ready, to prepare their messaging, to use to analyze the quality of their pitching and their sales, and to coach them with their pitching and with their negotiation or whatever? And then how much AI is maybe my buyer using as well? And I'm sure we'll get onto this topic about buyer uncertainty in a moment, and what's really driving this sort of panic and fear, and why buyers tend to be a bit frozen at the moment. We've been talking about that a lot for many years, but it's obviously getting worse all the time. And I think buyers are also using AI heavily because they don't want to make a mistake. They want to use AI to understand what does the landscape look for all the vendors for this problem that I have that I'm trying to solve, how much is it going to cost me, how much risk is involved, what happens if I make a mistake with this. And again, it's sort of the paralysis or analysis of I'm using AI heavily as a buyer as well. And so the uncertainty for sales leaders of like how much AI my seller is using, how much my buyer might be using on their side, how much I can try to like decrypt that for them as well. I think that's the biggest thing for leaders right now. It's just, I'm driving the inputs, but the outputs aren't what they used to be for me. And I haven't got certainty around that anymore.
So much to unpack there, and I think that sets up the conversation really nicely. And just going back to what you said, people are worried that deals are slipping and they're not trusting their forecasts. From what you just touched on there, do you feel that is more to do with how the market is behaving, and AI being a factor in that, and perhaps like other external forces impacting that? And how much is the way our revenue teams are going to market as well?
Look, it's like most things, it's going to be a combination of both. I think, like many clever people, all the challenger sale people, Gartner have been talking about this for a long time. Buying committees are getting bigger. There's more and more RFPs for smaller values all the time. And there's a lot more consultants being brought in to try and de-risk a decision. If we make a mistake with the vendor, it's not my fault. It's the consultant that told us to do this and measure the risk. And so I think people are trying to de-risk themselves, bringing more people into the buying committee, having more steps in the buying process, talking to more vendors, using AI like we talked about before. And so that's just definitely, it's making the decision much bigger. And I think the fear of missing out on overcoming the problem, the FOMO they have about that, is not enough for them to overcome their fear of messing up, the FOMO that they're feeling. Matt Dixon talks a lot about that in his book Jolt, and Matt was one of the original writers with Brent Adamson of the Challenger Sale. And he talks about this in Jolt, which is this FOMO is much greater than FOMO at the moment. And so I'm okay with not resolving the problem that I have, or I'm okay with not like increasing my ability to execute better as a sales organization or whatever the better solution is going to solve for me. I'm okay with that because it's avoiding me making a mess. I'm making a mistake and spending my company's budget. And in this economy, in this day and age, and where a lot of companies are going through the last kind of couple of years post-COVID, this renewed focus on cost cutting, on driving profitability, on redundancies, which were had not being quite as prevalent as before. And off the back of that, people are terrified, I think, and they're a bit frozen around their decision making. And it's not about like business risk, it's about personal risk. What could happen to me if I make a bad decision, or my team that I care about and that I've hired and I've developed and I want to be successful, if people that work for me make a mistake and it impacts on them because we have the wrong solution? I think people really care about that as well. So for all those reasons, it's, our ability to sell has been hamstrung a bit around that thing, but our ability as buyers to make decisions has also been restrained.
Do you think, Phil, a portion of that comes from our ability of how we're being measured? Which means some of that, like we could take a layer of our pipeline and just automatically assume that is fake because of how they're being measured to create constant how we currently measure pipeline. Whereas if we were able to step outside of that and start looking at what some of these measures should have been to give a more realistic look, then perhaps that the business would be more commercially viable anyway. Because we're so far down, like all of these methodologies from 2011 and 2014, Challenger Sale, and all these others. Gap selling also took off, which is just a variation of spin selling, but I won't go down the canon path, George, don't worry. But what that's done as a commercial disconnect or a commercial repercussion is we've gotten really good at qualifying stuff after the fact, but we haven't got any better of what we do before. And the architecture that actually solves the business problem of commercial viability, like to bring marketing into the fold from the start, or solve their product market fit, product message fit and timing, where what that does is bring, one, marketing is reduced to lead gen function, and two, that means we know as sales leaders, ex-CROs, partnership managers, whatever, a certain portion of our pipeline in Microsoft Dynamics or Salesforce, wherever that may live, is actually fake. And what's the cost of the business of creating the fake pipeline that doesn't exist?
Yeah, there's two really interesting things there, Adam. One is how people are being measured these days and what we're expecting them to do and what the outcomes we're expecting from that as well and how they might be different. And then number two, it's the reality of the pipeline and the validation of it. Mm-hmm. And let's take that first part first around measurement. One of the things that we're increasingly seeing, and again, this is like across the industry, particularly in technology, is that different companies' products are selling, how they're being distributed are happening differently, how they're implemented are different, and how they're being billed for and therefore accounted for on the vendor side is different. And like the classic example there is a company that sells licenses, that's access to a platform, and you pay on an annual basis, and you very clearly know what your revenue is going to be at the end of that financial period, versus consumption instead, that AWS model. And so we have a good sense of what the customer is going to consume. Ultimately, until they consume it, we have to account for it slightly differently. But we're now suddenly very invested in not how much they're selling, which is obviously still important, but how much revenue gets retained at the end of the period as well. Right? And so this idea of like net revenue retention instead of just revenue is now the shift in behavior of how I, as a salesperson and as a sales leader and as a sales strategy or operations revenue operations team, how I set up and run my business is having to shift and change because of how companies are having to bill and therefore incentivize their people. And that now carries across. So let's get into the validation piece. That carries across from just the sales organization into the marketing organization that are like providing the pipeline and the quality and the reality of that. And they're able to validate whether this pipeline seems they can have a level of confidence around it. And then on the flip side, the sales team where they do a great job and maybe the deal closes, but maybe it's not for what we once thought it was going to be, because I piped it 400 grand and maybe it only closed for 45 for whatever reason, because it provided the right level of coverage for me at one point and took the heat off. Or the deal that had like the perfect compelling event and was absolutely going to close by the end of December might not close by the end of December. The decision maker's gone away. The compelling event is actually our compelling event, not their compelling event. The fact that I'm throwing discount at it is not actually changing their mind for all the reasons we talked about before and the fear they're experiencing. And when there isn't that validation across various points in the funnel, before the funnel, in the funnel, after the funnel, you hand off the deal to your customer success team, who now have to go and drive that adoption because you want to retain that revenue, because you want to drive consumption of the product. So suddenly you have the opportunity to be able to validate that pipeline at various points, which goes certainly the quality of the pipeline coming in, the visibility into the pipeline when it sits under sales, but then the quality of that handoff, like passing that business over to your customer success team, wherever that sits in the world, and whether it's a person or a machine that's doing this and driving adoption, you have a really clear idea on how well we think we're going to retain that revenue and whether we'll be able to bill for the same amount of revenue next year again, or how much that we thought was going to come in based on consumption is actually coming in. And so there's now these multiple points of validation that didn't really exist before. So for me, it's exciting, but there's always going to be that lag of adoption, of change, of recognition, of the metrics being appropriately spread across the business so that everybody's aligned in wanting the same things, the same outcomes, therefore are executing the same behaviors as the inputs.
But do you think that comes back to the commercial oversight or the foresight of that oversight, in terms of, in my day, chief revenue was an overarching umbrella where we would look over what marketing needed to do to get product market fit and timing from the market. So for sales, would give that to them. We would also give that back to product, so they knew product road mapping for 12 to 24 months. And the one thing that I think now happens, and I know that we touched on in a preview when we had a chat, is there's no structure between business development and CSMs anymore. So what used to happen is we would do like a presentation day. That presentation day would have all the key stakeholders, the key end users. And from that day, we would map out like a commercial viability communication plan handover to give customer success, so that they knew this is what's going to happen, this is what's expected, these are the key touch points. Phil likes pink donuts, he likes black coffee. This is what his team expects, this is how often you're going to see him, these are the backup contacts, etc. So what they're getting is actually what we've sold, but that doesn't seem to fit in a lot of the tech SaaS world. I've spoken about this many times and people have said they've never even seen what a communication plan handover is. But that then tells me that in terms of commercial viability, they don't know what the serviceability plan to know if they're upside down on the contract. So it's no wonder when it goes to CSM land that things completely go skewy. And we don't have to look very far in terms of the LinkedIn bubble, where certain big leaders like RB2B, Adam Robertson, talks about reactivation requirements. But that's only happening because, one, you've got no commercial oversight, and two, you've got no like revenue alignment architecture in terms of structure. But if we just go back to what these pillars used to be, which is where I was taught when I came up, we wouldn't have this problem. But we've got like leadership that are not true CROs. They're probably just elevated from being an SDR manager. So how on earth are we tasking them with what this architecture should look like if they've never been tasked with the individual billings of each department.
I think one of the really interesting aspects of what you're talking about there, Adam, is when we were coming up once upon a time, and I certainly remember this, like when I was first selling CRM over this nascent thing at the time called the cloud, or we used to call it on demand, before like for the service acronym ever existed. It was an education sale, and we were educating. Number one, we to honor and respect the fact that we're asking people to store their precious customer data not on a server that's under the desk with their old platform, but now we want to put it in our cloud, and our cloud is secure, and it's performance, and it's accessible, and they can get it on multiple devices, etc. So there was a kind of an education on changing their belief system about trust of data, and that it was better to be handled and managed and delivered by somebody else. We were then having to teach them almost like the business acumen, the sales acumen of the value of having a CRM system. Having a pipeline and being able to predict the outcome of that and having a forecast is a good thing for me to do in my business, and to be able to base a forecast on what was in the pipeline versus let's just look at what we closed last December and add a percentage multiplier to that instead. So this big education for sales leader became this thing that as an honor and responsibility around doing. And so I think by the time we got to the point of closing the customer, we were so invested in their success that they'd taken such a risk with us. They changed their mindset. They were trailblazers in their own industry. We were so invested in that, and we needed, number one, we're a growing company. We know there was certainly a land and expand approach where I can sell the small deal and add the users, or I can sell the smaller license version and upgrade them to the next edition, or I can sell them one cloud and add 2 or 3 clouds the next year. And so if I'm going to do that, I need to make sure they're successful. I think the second thing that's related to that as well, Adam, is the transition of territories. I would have the same customer this year as I had last year when I was an account executive. I could build a relationship. I would not want to let that person down. And I would get the value from investing in that relationship this year. And I would get that this year and ongoing. Whereas these days, I feel because organizations are growing so quickly, we're growing headcount, we're having to slice up territories. And the account that I used to have last year that I put so much blood, sweat, and tears in is not going to be mine next year. So therefore, am I better off just like trying to smash and grab as much revenue now, throw that like customer over the fence, the proverbial wall to like customer success, and go, it's your business now. I don't get any value from whether they add on or upgrade or if they even renew next year. So I think that's a really interesting kind of shift in the sense of personal responsibility that we used to have versus now we're expecting of our sales people where everything is urgent, everything is important. Their ability to prioritize things like doing a product over to customer success because I want the customer to be successful next year and I'm going to do that, versus do I spend the time doing a serviceability report and handover with CS, or do I go and call this next prospect or so I could build some pipeline to cover my own backside, right? And so this balancing of where I spend my time and the return that I get out of it personally and what keeps me in my job, in my seat, I think is shifting some of this behavior over time.
No, Phil, I think that's really interesting, and something that I can't recall exactly who it was that said this to us, but they pointed out the fact that people in sales roles, like they're lucky to last 18 months these days in a role before they move on elsewhere, either performance manage it out or get a better offer, whatever it is. Whereas historically, as you said, if you're building relationships with account, like you were starting to reap the rewards of seeds that you planted 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago, like really a salesperson should just be staying like in that one spot and doing better and better for themselves, for the organization financially, right? As that timing works better, as that trust is built with all the accounts that they're responsible for. But that seems to have maybe gone away, Phil, or at least that's like what the data is telling us with how often sales people are hopping around between jobs. And I suppose in your experience, why is it that people are having to jump around and move so much? Why are we missing all these targets? Is it a culture problem? Is it a measurement problem? Is it an incentives problem? What are you seeing out there, Phil?
All of the above, man. We certainly have much greater focus here about high performance culture. And knowing that a salesperson's territory will not stay consistent or constant for more than 2 or 3 years at a go, not only are we looking for the high performers that are nailing it and they're doing their number and they're hitting their goals and they're supporting the company, that they're getting promoted to the next level. So they're not small business, they're commercial, or they're not commercial, they're enterprise. And so we're moving people up through their careers, which any good company should want to do. And put a lot of pride in that. But at the same time, it means that But when I was an A and I'm getting promoted, the relationships that I built last year, I have to wave goodbye to them and hand it over to the next day. It's like the next salesperson is going to take it over that I should want to do an honorable handover to as well of the relationship. And maybe I have a great CRM system that allows me to do that as well. I can pass all the activity and the notes and everything that goes in there. But I think now we're in the situation where if you're promoting, that's a great result to have. But if you're performance managing and you're managing people out, then there's a bit of a long tail around that because it's not something that you can do overnight. It's something that you have to do very carefully. It's something you have to recognize where people are going off course. And it's not just necessarily about their revenue performance. It's sometimes also about their behaviors and their activity levels and the things that they're doing versus the outcome that it's having. And so I have a really beautiful model I use with all the sales leaders that I engage with as well. And so you'll have to picture this in your mind, guys. But if you can think about a 2x2 matrix where there's a y-axis from the bottom to the top, and that's measuring, are they doing the right things? Are they doing it right? And then on the x-axis from left, it's measuring, are they getting it done? And so in an ideal world, we see the people that are doing all the right things are being successful in getting it done. They're building pipeline, they're closing deals, they're hitting their targets, the revenue's coming in because they're doing things like having a minimum number of customer calls and meetings every week, every month, every quarter, that they're engaging with the right resources, that they're taking their training and their education around their product or their skills levels. They're coming into the office, that they're attending training, that they're coming to team meetings, that they're helping their peers. All these good sort of sales behaviors that you want to see, that guess what? They're updating their CRM and keeping their opportunities accurate for the forecast. So if they do all those things, that's really good behavior. But not every salesperson is doing all those things all the time. And it's not always eventuating in success for them. And so the people that are in the top right, they're getting it done or they're doing it right. Brilliant. We love those people. We want to entrust those with more responsibility. We want to give them stretch targets. We get them coaching other people on the team, and they're going to be promoted at some point in the future. Sometimes you get people in the top left quadrant that I just talked about, which is they're doing all the right things, but they're not being successful. And why is that? I, as a sales leader, I always say for the leaders that I coach, that is where you spend your time. It's with the people that are doing all the right things, but they need your help with the quality of the execution. So they're not preparing maybe for the sales meetings as well as they could. They're not engaging and working in a closed loop way with marketing or customer success. They are not taking their training as well as they could. They need some coaching, some help. And that's where you as a salesperson or sales leader spend your time. Sometimes you get people in the bottom left-hand quadrant. That's where performance management happens. They're not doing the right things and it's not leading to success and the numbers aren't there. And so you're going, okay, that's probably where the idea of a PIP, a performance incentive plan, comes from, which is here's a minimum set of activities of things we need to see happen and some results out of that, if you mentally visualize it, they're moving from the bottom left-hand quadrant to the top left-hand quadrant, so they're doing the right things, and then I can start coaching them. I can't coach them on their 25 customer calls every week or every month if they're not making the calls. So if you start doing the things, I can start coaching on the quality of them. Otherwise, we can make an agreement that maybe this role, this company is not the best place for you, and that managing out process can begin. One of the biggest challenges for sales leaders again these days is, what about those salespeople that are in the bottom right-hand quadrant? They're being successful, they're getting it done, the revenue's coming in, but they're not exhibiting those right behaviors. They're not coming into the office, they're not helping their peers, they're not playing nice in the sandpit, they're not engaging with their supporting resources in the right way, they're not updating their opportunities, they're typically like the sandbaggers or the happy ears. And so it's, I love your revenue, but I hate your behaviors. And so there's two problems for those salespeople. Number one, their behavior is toxic and it leads to other people on the team matching their behaviors, going, that person's really successful, I'm going to do what they do. I'm not coming to the office, I'm not doing my training, I'm shouting at my SE across the office floor. And so they start adopting those behaviors because they're not successful and because they don't have the capability or an execution to do it. And the second thing is, for those A's that are successful, they're one bad deal, one bad month, one bad quarter from being in the bottom left. And when they are, I as your sales leader, I can't protect you if you end up in the bottom left. So behaviors are massively important to go hand in hand with success for any sales leader when you're looking at where you spend your time on your team as well. Are they doing it right and are they getting it done for the kind of focus and activity I as the sales leader need to spend my time on with my team?
Do you think, as an extension question, if I may, Phil, what do we do with the portion of the market that aren't as clinically and well attuned as how you've just portrayed there in terms of how we're measuring that? So what about the less mature companies that are still just measuring outputs and not looking at the fact that these salespeople might not have the revenue right now, but they might have all the account intelligence from all the key accounts that they should have. And when the timing lines up, you're going to be incredibly successful, but they're not lensing out long enough to understand how valuable what they've done with those relationships they've built. And as you said, sometimes those people were managed out before all of that comes to fruition. What do we do in those circumstances? And what is the advice to companies that might be going through that right now?
I think it's a journey that you're going on. I think the first thing is you need to decide what good looks like. So even if we haven't seen success in the business yet, and maybe we're a startup and we're growing and we're scaling and we have some successful salespeople. And the funny thing is in startups, they tend to get those salespeople that they're visionaries and risk takers, and they don't tend to want to stay around too long. If you think about that technology adoption curve, they're like, I'll come in and I'll do the job, but once we start seeing some success, I'm probably going to move on to the next thing in the next startup. Because at some point, sometimes those sales folks get found out a little bit as to why they've bounced around and they end up in lots of new startups all the time. But going back to what good looks like, it's important for you to figure out what does an excellence profile look like? What are those behaviors? And most sales leaders, startup or otherwise, have been successful themselves. They've seen successful salespeople. They know what's made success in the past. And I think the three of us here were all experienced, have good level of sales and business acumen, and we understand what those behaviors are, that they're bringing the right mindset, they're getting up in the morning, they're planning properly, they're engaging the right resources, they're driving the right levels of activity, they bring a certain level of humbleness but ambition. There's these sort of vertical and horizontal things we look for in our people. And so we know what good looks like. And so that's part of the challenge, which is I need the behaviors to look right. And that's what I'm going to measure success around is the inputs. Until we then start seeing, after a period of time, 6, 12, 18 months, I get some solid data, and maybe I have a good CRM system that allows me to see that, but I see some solid data around what behavior looks like, and therefore I can define what excellence looks like as well. And certainly for us at Salesforce, in terms of our high-performance program, we look at our most successful salespeople, and we were able to then analyze and break down what does good behavior look like, and not only in terms of the kinds of activities. A great activity is I have to call and meet my customers. Okay, brilliant. We all know that. To what extent do I have to do that? And we know that the most successful salespeople are making between 15 and 20 good, high quality, decision maker level conversations every week. And so if you're doing, that's a tick for us in terms of the level of activity. There's about 15 or 20 things that we'll look for behavior wise. It doesn't become quite as important if the success is there. But the success is not there at the same time as the behaviors being there. Then we could pivot and start going, okay, we know what an excellence profile looks like. We know what the behaviors are, the results of success in our company at that segment level, at that industry in this part of the world. And that's the basis then of a coaching program.
I only wish that the market shared your unbelievable clarity on what good looks like, because what we've found is most people and most organizations don't have that feel. Like they don't have the ability to lens out long enough, and either they get managed out or those high performers actually leave, and that account intelligence is lost. So that was part of the reason. Through this frustration of where that lives, where it should go, who should have access to that across the departments from marketing, product, customer success, what we've found time and time again across industry, and it's not even specific, it's like I think I've worked in 13 industries, it's like prevalent to all of them, that is lost. And that could come down to a training problem, and maybe they're not using Salesforce or Dynamics properly. But yeah, I've never seen anyone explain that the way that you just did there. But I wish the market had that. But maybe if they did, maybe they wouldn't need Chief Revenue School, George.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's why we didn't have Phil on, just because he's well aligned. I think, Adam, you've said this for a long time, and you're more tenured than I am, Adam, and what you keep saying to me is anyone who has been in the seat for long enough sees these things to be true, where we may have lost our way in the last 10 or 15 years. And that's certainly true of the conversation that we've had with Phil and many others this year, is they have come to very similar realizations that you did, Adam, across your 24 years, and then explained to me why what I was seeing with marketing just being completely hamstrung, reduced to lead gen, forced to do things that we're not very good at, like trying to predict who is in market and when, instead of getting back to doing things that we are really good at, like building brand, building trust, making sure people know and like us, supporting sales wherever we can. It just makes so much sense when I hear you explain it, Phil, and of course, as you have done to me for several years now, Adam.
Yeah.
Phil, in terms of changing that behavior, and you said, first of all, you really want to identify what are the top performers doing? What are those that aren't performing as well doing? And can we replicate or change that behavior? What are some of the roadblocks that you typically come across when it comes to actually changing that behavior? Because I feel like it's something that's easier said than done, especially in large organizations.
Yeah. Like, I think there's, I mentioned this a little bit earlier on, this idea of like horizontal development, and we want to develop people and bring them forward and give them more capability. And so one of the things we can do is put them through the skills class, and it's discovery skills, or it's presentation skills, or it's negotiation skills, or it's closing skills. And so you can add some more kind of skills into the bucket and go, here's the things that you're better at doing. One of the elements with that is, and as a learning professional, I snap to this model quite a lot in my head, which is the Kirkpatrick levels of learning. And so what they talk about, there's 4 levels. The first level is when you deliver training, did the participant, the attendee, did they like it? And we kind of account for that with the CSAT, the smallest sheets. So you got a 4.8 out of 5, brilliant. The second level is, did they learn something? And you normally account for that by, is there maybe a multiple choice quiz at the end? Is there a stand and deliver presentation where they have to show capability? And so you can test for understanding of the material and the content. The third level is, have they brought the increased capability into the field? Are they doing this new set of skills in their day job? And that is much more difficult to measure. And as a sales leader, I'm coaching sales leaders and going, are you going on ride-alongs? Are you observing your AEs doing the things that they should be doing, that they've been taught to do better? Are they bringing this new technique they learned in this negotiation skills class, and is it showing up in their customer meeting the next week? And so transitioning skills into behaviors is a big leap. The fourth level is around the return on investments. I paid $1 for this training and I generated $2 increased sales. Okay, I had a return on investment and it paid for itself. And you can measure those 3, levels 1, 2, and 4 reasonably easily. Level 3 is very hard because it's very subjective, right? But did it change their behaviors? And so one of the biggest things I then focus on is around this sense of a growth mindset. Is not the horizontal skills, it's the vertical development of them. And their sense of, I am a better negotiator. I am capable of taking my customer on toe to toe. Or I'm a really curious person. I can deploy my discovery skills. Or I'm a fabulous, attentive preparer of my presentations, and I practice and I do dry runs and I seek feedback afterwards because that's what I do. It's my identity and that's how I see myself. And so one of the things I spend time tapping into is, from an NLP perspective, what are your values? What's important to you? How do you see yourself as your identity? These behaviors lead you towards what your purpose is. And so once somebody kind of sees themselves as that improved version of themselves, able to do these things, it then flows down into their behaviors. It's how they show up. It's what we observe them do. And so I think there's one aspect is great. I spent many years giving salespeople and sales leaders more skills. Now, over the last few years in my coaching life, I'm much more concerned with how do I change their mindset and their belief in their capability to do the thing that they're actually able to do.
Yeah, powerful. Extension question, Phil, as you were saying that, it brought me back to some of my heads of sales roles. Do you see, is there still a place in really large teams? So the biggest business development team that I've led is 17 people. Did you ever see like an ultra specific specialization of roles? Because like for a live example, I had people that were better at the credit and risk aspect of the deal process than some of the others. Yeah. So what I found was, no matter how much I tried to teach some of the skills to the 13 other ones in that team, the other 4 were actually better at doing those. So I actually divvied up the tasks, and as a whole, we're able to excel and break some records that I'm sure people can read online. But does that still have a place in large organizations, or do you find that we're trying to get everyone up to exactly the same speed so that they can be measured the same?
Wow. Look, I think as any team, any organization, you'll tend to slice up roles and specialize. And some people that have the same title are better at doing this versus that. Like we see that within our sales development organization. Like I joined Salesforce, I started as an SDR, as qualifying inbound leads to get my feet under the table. But now we have an SDA role, which is like an analyst role, who's like a much more junior SDR who's learning the role and practicing and cleaning data, and then becomes the SDR and they're qualifying inbound leads, and then they become like a BDR and they're outbounding instead before they can even become like an AE. And then you have those grades within the AE. But even if I talk about the sales enablement world, Now, first, I was an account executive at Salesforce. I moved into sales enablement in about 2008. It was very new across the industry and the world of those days. It used to be called sales effectiveness. Then it was called sales productivity, market readiness, sales enablement these days. But once upon a time, I did everything. I was based in Dublin, like this is an Irish accent. I was based in our Dublin office, and I was doing everything from an enablement perspective. I reported into somebody in San Francisco in headquarters, but I did the entire gamut of enablement. And I was building content, designing curriculum, delivering, doing stakeholder engagement, managing all of that over time, and then doing that like for onboarding and ongoing and pre-promotion stuff. And then over time, you start slicing it up. And you're going, some people are better at creating content than they are delivering it. Some people are better at stakeholder engagement and being the account manager, the internal account manager, than they are at being the trainer in the front of the room. And organizations start to do that and specialize over time as well. I think the other aspect to this is that over time, as you find you need to start like specializing a little bit, it creates this career path for people. And it creates this ability for them to either move into the career that they want and specialize and get better at it, or they're like, in my career mosaic, this portfolio I have of experiences, which is these days no longer can be just linear, it has to move around a little bit. I need to go and get experience in this thing. And so it gives me the opportunity to be able to find more specialist work, to be able to grow my overall sort of capability. And then to your point, Adam, about, leaning into strengths, absolutely. One of the things that I'm really focused on with our leadership team at the moment is their ability to think about their business as a franchise. And so an aspect of franchise is, if I own my franchise, and let's say Salesforce is my franchisor, and I sign up and I take on a quota and a territory, and that's my fee, but they give me customers to sell to, and they give me products to sell, and they give me tools to sell it at, and they give me a beautiful tower and circular key to sell it from. But I'm signing up for this. But I have my team is my employees. And I then need to think about, for the culture of my team, for the strength of the team, who's good at what within my little franchise that I then leverage and give responsibility to. Some people are awesome at organizing events. Some people are awesome at organizing training. Some people are really good at certain products. Some people are really good at coaching each other on their presentation skills or dry running a negotiation or whatever. And so you as the leader, more than anything, and again, I'm passionate about this, you as a leader should be getting out of the way of your team and becoming a curious coach-like leader, not a directive to this leader, or indeed even worse, get out of my way and I'll do the job better than you can, my salesperson. And having that mindset of being coach-like, of entrusting, of giving responsibility, of figuring out the strengths in your team, so you can not so much improve people's weaknesses, but you're covering the success for people's weaknesses as well. To have that sense of tribe, of a franchise where we're supporting each other, and like our success is everyone's success.
Yeah, it's interesting, Phil, because that's like how we keep beating the drum with what we talk about in closed circuit selling is basically like a Venn diagram of all the ingredients that you need, and in the middle is excellence.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I guess we've just got to get back to where business as a whole can actually see that as commercial common sense, because they might have been, I think we've gone through this like Fugazi haze where it's very rare that people have the clarity that you've displayed here, man. Like, hats off to you. If the world had this already, they wouldn't need me to be teaching these pillars. But yeah, I love that you've described, I like to think of it like this. What you've described to me is commercial common sense. If we were commercially building a cake, what are the ingredients that we need to build the intersect of the perfect cake? Phil tells us these are the ingredients and these are the people that can follow that recipe, right? It should be that simple. But that's unfortunately not what we see at market. From what we see as a whole, like it should be that basic, but it's really not.
Or, Adam, I know the ingredients are. I might have an experience like actually mixing them together and creating a cake, but also I need to create 20 cakes. And I can't perfect this cake. I got to do 20 cakes that aren't great cakes, but I have to feed the team. I have to provide revenue to the company and products to customers. And so I can't focus on the ability to drive excellence because I've got so many other things that are just, my hair is on fire and they're urgent and I have to go and do this thing. I can't focus quite as much on quality and excellence. And so that's a real challenge for sales leadership these days.
That's what George and I see. We talk about our system at Chief Revenue School as the pillars of those fundamentals, which could be the ingredients. But some of them we see now skip the method of the recipe because they don't know what the pillars are anymore because they've been washed out of the market.
Yeah, it's a big challenge, and I don't see it going away in the near term. I think the key to it is like mindset and knowing who you are and believing how you want to show up, and how other people will perceive you as well will shift these behaviors. If I'm going to be this leader that will develop people, that will turn them into incredible sellers, that in turn will turn them into these solutioners for my customers, if I truly see myself as the person that does that, I'll spend the time on the excellence and I'll prioritize in a different way in terms of how I spend my time and what I think I look like. We went through a really interesting exercise with all of our sales leaders last year where we got them to categorize what they do in their calendars into 4 different buckets. We said, first of all, you spend time with your customers. Every sales leader does, and they come in at the right level with the right kind of capability and messaging. Secondly, they spend time as a business leader, and it's a bit more of the internal, their operational rigor and their networking inside the company and how they do all those things, maybe on their own with other people, forecasting, setting targets and quotas, etc., territories. And so they're doing some of that operational stuff. The third thing they have to do is invest in their people and improve their capability and dedicate time to doing that. And then the fourth bucket, which is an interesting one, is time for themselves, for their own personal deep thinking, reflection, investment in their capability, their own enablement, and their own wellness as well, of making sure they're carving out time for those things. And so we said, okay, if you were to color code everything in your calendar that happened in the last week into those 4 different buckets, and they could be like blue and red and orange and green or whatever, what does that look like? Okay, then going back and do it for the last month. How do you think you spent your time in those? Oh, I see customers a lot. How many hours did you spend on customers last month? Oh, actually only about 17% of my time. How much time do you spend developing if you see yourself as like someone that invests in your team and their capability, how much time do you spend on that? Only like 24%. How much time do you spend on customers or on the internal rigor? How much time did you spend on yourself? Almost
Right.
zero.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting. It's okay. So then if you were to look forward for the next week, the next month, the next quarter, how do you spend your time? And there's a famous economist and business thinker, I'm trying to remember his name, but one of his lines, he has a video on this YouTube, which is, you are your calendar. You are your schedule. How people perceive you is how you spend your time. If you see yourself as an incredible talent multiplier, that's where you'll spend the majority of your time. If you see yourself as a really well-balanced sales leader, you'll have time dedicated to wellness and yourself in your calendar. If you see yourself as an incredible, like customer-focused, obsessed sales leader, that will show up in your calendar. And it's not about being 25% between those 4 different buckets. It's about representing the version of yourself that you want to be, that you see yourself as. And therefore, if that's your identity, your behaviors will snap to that. It's really fascinating.
History favors the bold.
That's right.
Georgie,
So Phil, is that why then you say that growth mindset is so important then, to try and instill that sense of like continuous improvement, doing the behaviors that drive the right outputs, like why that is so important at an individual level?
Yeah, because guess what? Like your identity and how you see yourself and whether or not that aligns to your values is going to drive what those behaviors look like. It'll also drive where you focus on improving skills, because we'll naturally invest in like the entire idea of strength finders and all the Clifton work around that is like double downing and investing in the things that you're really good at, being aware of what some of your weaknesses are, but not trying to like be the perfectly balanced professional. Well, I'm weak in these areas, I better go and spend time in improving on those. No, I double down and I get much better at doing what I'm really good at. Back to your question, Adam, my commentary around balancing your team and a franchise. And so your sense of identity will define my behaviors, but most importantly, will define the habits that I want to build and my ability to build that habit and for that habit to stick. And so if you deconstruct a habit, and there's lots of research on this, there's broadly 3 different elements to it. First of all, there's the trigger or the cue. What's the thing that's happened that's going to inspire me or kick me up to deliver or to do the behavior? What's the thing I'm then doing based on what that trigger is? And then what's the reward? What makes me feel better for doing that thing? And it could be, and typically the reward fits into the kind of the broad categories of some sort of like adrenaline, dopamine, cortisol, all the feel goods that you get in your body that we might describe as things like achievement and pride and success and progression. And in our heads, we're thinking that, but normally what's happening is we're getting that sort of warmer fuzzies off the activity. And so that's a reinforcing behavior. We'll do the thing. Sometimes the same is true for bad habits. Whether it's like doom scrolling on the phone and I spend too long doing that. But guess what? All the social media companies have figured that out, and they've delivered tooling to us that allows us to maximize on our cortisol and our dopamine, right? And the cue might be, the trigger is every time I'm on public transport, I automatically take my phone out and I go to this platform and I look at the videos or the comments from people, and maybe that's good or it's bad. But if I can train myself that goes, actually the trigger when I get in public, my behavior will be that I'll open up some sort of educational platform. It's always LinkedIn Learning, or it is an audiobook on Spotify, or a podcast series that I'm listening to, like the wonderful B2B playbook. And so my new trigger is every time I do that, I instigate this new behavior, and the reward is I've learned something. I've been able to deploy that into my day job. Again, if I'm focusing on level 3 Kirkpatrick and my behavior. And so if I can orient and recognize and change my mindset what the reward is, I suddenly go, I feel really good about this trigger resulting in a more healthy behavior. And I'm orienting around that reward rather than the bad behavior. Because the other classic example is like eating the bar of chocolate or not going to the gym. And the cue is, it's certain time of the day, like I go to the gym in the morning or the evening, okay, it's that time of the day, I decide I do or I don't go to the gym, and I get some level of reward, which is I feel great because I'm really proud of myself, I went to the gym. Or, oh, you know what, I didn't go to the gym, I got the extra few minutes in bed. Or I got an extra few minutes in work and got some more work done. And so there's that subconscious reward of the bad behavior. Or I did a bar of chocolate, that's good, I'm feeling proud of myself, it leads to better healthy choices for my physical fitness. Or I did eat the chocolate, and guess what? The sugar gave me that sugar hit and some level of cortisol or whatever into my bloodstream. And I feel reward from doing it. And so reframing the reward is the key to unlocking good habits and sustaining them and keeping them up. Like we're all coming up to the new year and our resolutions, right? And like we all go to the gym in January and then we stop going in February. But it's like, how can I reinforce the good outcome and the reward and minimize and realize and understand the bad reward that comes from bad habits is not something that I want to sustain, because guess what? It's not aligned with my values. It doesn't align with my identity. It doesn't lead me towards my purpose. And therefore, it shouldn't be part of my behaviors as well.
It sounds like, Phil, that means the key to business as a whole is not only the architecture of business pillars, but make those pillars are framed not as negative outputs, but they're an embodiment of how that person's going to feel. And then if we do this, we bring these people and these departments on the journey to get a business outcome.
The key is every time I talk to a customer and I learn something about the market and I gather some insights and I see a trend, I go back to marketing. I talk to my marketing buddy about what I need from them instead. And every time a deal closes for whatever value, that's the cue and the trigger for me to go and have that proper handoff with the customer success resource if I have one, ensuring the customer knows how they can be successful. And I automatically do that every single time, because guess what? I'm a person that's invested in, and one of my values is around the success of my customer. And so therefore, automatically my behaviors will be that. So you can apply these behavioral triggers to like lots of aspects of the customer engagement process, your internal process. It goes back to if I'm a sales leader and I'm looking at doing it right and getting it done, as soon as I see a lack of those right behaviors, my good habit, make sure that I step into a coaching plan ASAP. And I start documenting all my conversations as soon as that happens. Because guess what? As soon as I get into a performance conversation, HR is going to ask me, have you been documenting your conversations? So yeah, so like this idea of me seeing myself as a certain way is fundamental to me adopting the right behaviors that allows me to do all those things in that pillar, that framework, that closed circuit methodology that I should be doing, right?
Yeah. George, I know you're dying.
We spoke in our pre-call about software moving just from people purchasing the software, handling the implementation on their own, and being left hung out to dry. And we're seeing that a lot with customer success and a lot of frustration at customer success because the customer's been promised something that they can't deliver, because the customer success team isn't able to keep up with whatever it is that the customer truly needs. Maybe they're not incentivized properly. Maybe there's a broken handoff. And we said that we think that software is going to be moving to not just buying software, but software with a service. Who wants to explain what that means, software with a service, and why it almost feels inevitable? Phil, do you want to maybe jump in first?
Yeah, I definitely have a perspective on this. And for a long time in my industry, in cloud computing, we would talk about software as a
Yeah.
service. Like the old analogy was, you no longer need a power station in your backyard to generate your power. You just plug it into the wall, right? If you want to turn on your toaster or your TV, it's the same with cloud computing. You just plug in and it's all there for you. You just pay your subscription and your billing is predictable, that kind of stuff. And so software as a service, something we would always talk about. And as we've already been mentioning today, we've got to this point where the pressure on salespeople, the expectations on them, the lack of connectedness within organizations quite often, and they tend to throw the software over the wall. Not only throw the relationship over the wall to the customer, they'll throw the software over the wall to the customer success person. They throw the software over the wall to the customer. And there's this massive sense of, okay, I now have all these licenses and I have to allocate them, and I know I can do some customization, but I need support, I need help, and I might need a partner, or I need customer success help with this. And this sense of, sometimes we go back to that conversation about customers delaying their decisions. It's, I don't believe I can be successful rolling the software out. And it might be my first or second or third time deploying this type of software. It could be CRM, it could be multiple times of deploying the same vendor. And I don't trust myself to do a good job of it. And so I'm nervous about the success of it. And so therefore that's also delaying the decision, right? So we covered that off, I think, earlier on pretty well. This idea of software with a service, and I'm going to give props to my friend Cian McLaughlin, who you'll find all over LinkedIn and socials, for coining that phrase of software with a service and popularizing it, which is, we have to be very invested in the success of our customer, particularly these days, particularly as we shift from this idea of subscription to consumption.
Yep.
And how we measure the success around that with new metrics in sales organizations these days. And if I want to drive the right metric at the back of it, I have to be very invested in the success of the customer to drive their consumption, to drive more users doing more actions, more CPU that I'm using, or whatever it happens to be. So I need to have more of that happening. And so if that's going to happen, I want to make sure that they're being successful by providing the right level of service. And whether it's like a serviceability plan that we have with CS, or it's that maybe, and depending on the scale of the organization and the value of the deal you want to retain and the revenue, it's like, I need to co-invest with the customer on their services. And maybe it's my internal professional services, or it's with a partner that's a specialist in that part of the world. I'm seeing a lot of technology companies that are carving out budget to spend on customers. They're often called service work exception suites. And so it's like, we're going to provide some free services to the customer to make sure they get off the ground successfully. The other thing that I see a lot of sales organizations doing is structuring their deals where they will heavily discount licenses in the first year and then level set them again for the second year, particularly with licenses, sometimes with consumption plans as well. That means that the customer, every year, if I'm the customer, I've got X amount of budget. I've got $100,000 or $1 million or $10 million to spend every year on this. My first year, I have really high upfront costs. I got implementation costs, customization costs, integration costs, training costs, ramping up users on using the tool and extracting value. And so I need your pricing support, Mr., to be able to reduce my first year outlay. And again, a lot of technology vendors have to be very invested in that, of like taking the hit in the first year revenue, but knowing there's guarantee on the second, third, fourth, fifth year of the relationship, because the customer will be successful. They'll buy more, they'll upgrade, they'll, most importantly. And so it's worth you sacrificing day one license or consumption revenue for what you'll get in the overall lifetime of the relationship as well. Software as a service now needs to be, you're in the boat with the customer around them being successful, hitting their goals, reaching their targets, etc.
Yeah. I don't think George is going to have any surprises on saying I'm unequivocally aligned with everything you said there, Phil, and everything that's taught me since 2002, 2001 was the easiest way that we accomplish all of that is we follow the communication plan handover as a structured pillar, and then we know what they expect, when they expect it, who's involved, what that's going to look like, what it's going to cost, how do we implement that, how do we make sure we exceed their expectations to operational excellence. It's all in the plan. The sooner that we get back to delivering on what you've said there as part of those pillars in the handover, the easier business continuity will be. But yeah, I think that a lot of software companies are now realizing they could have just copied this from these pillar fundamentals from other industries, because it was initially something that they skipped. They just thought that they could throw people over the fence and they'd just figure it out. But what ends up happening is they'll go to competitors that don't expect you to figure it out. They actually give you the service of how to get you there and get you to the dream state while holding your hand to do it. But yeah, the easiest way to do that is to bring back these fundamentals.
Probably an extension question I have from that, Phil, is if we're moving from software as a service to software with a service, do buyers now need to realistically adjust how they're budgeting like for this software with a service too? Because that's coming out of someone's pocket, right? And can these vendors cut into their own margins? I imagine as competition keeps increasing, it's been a race to the bottom already. So do they need to readjust where that money's coming from or how they think about how much it's going to cost them?
Look, I think it's long been a negotiation tactic for those that are buying SaaS. Like Gartner and many other analysts will tell buyers that when you talk to this vendor and it comes down to it, there's some key things. Wait until the end of the month or the end of the quarter, the end of the year before you do a deal, and you'll get more percentage points off. But also leverage like your high upfront cost in the first year and make that a factor in terms of getting better licensing and better discount rates, etc. So it's always been something that I think procurement has been very aware of and bearing in mind. I think though that on both sides of the equation of the relationship, there is now this appreciation that we need to certainly have budget put aside for implementation. It's no longer a case that I can just go and read the help files or do an online course and know how to do the implementation myself. And even if I have a full-time resource managing my deployment of this inside the company, I still need to train them, yes, but I also need to have help with implementation as well. Particularly when there's some mission critical things happening, there's some security required, you need to make sure you're implementing it in the right way. Most of the time, most software vendors are providing a very secure platform with all the right locks on the house. But if you don't lock the doors in your house, as an owner of that house, it's not the builder's fault, it's the owner's fault kind of thing. A lot of those things are showing up these days. And so making sure you're spending the right amount of time and focus and awareness on those things is obviously key as well. But it's something that's been thought about at both sides, really, as the vendor, as the buyer. I need to make sure that I'm doing those things. I think the other element to this is, if we think about good old Crossing the Chasm and the Geoffrey Moore book, he talks about the visionaries, the early tech adopters, and then there's this chasm you have to cross over until you get to mainstream, and there's the laggards, and then there's the folks that are like, I'm never going to buy a platform or a tool like this, particularly if it's in the cloud, until I see every other person on the planet doing it, and then finally I'll do it. So if everyone's doing it, I'll do it. Whereas early on in the journey, particularly for us at Salesforce, we were selling to the visionaries. We were selling to visionaries that had budget, that saw the value, that could take the risk, that wanted the newest, best thing that they could have, the shiniest thing. What can tend to happen is they'll take more risk. Sometimes those individuals, the decision makers, can tend to move on, and their focus will go on to the next thing as well. But now very much, particularly in the SaaS industry, it's gone right the way down to the end of the tech adoption curve because everyone's doing it. It's hard for me to buy on-premise software now. Well, my CFO is probably not going to let me do it. And probably my chief security officer is going to say, you're going to get better levels of security with your data being in the cloud than it is being the server on-premise instead. And there'll be more uptime and better responsiveness. And I'll have to account for the capitalization of the hardware in a different way. And so there's all these incentives and reasons why people will want to be that laggard, but certainly be buying a SaaS platform. But now that they're doing it, it's okay, because we're laggards, because we're risk averse, we know we need to have strong implementation because we've always done it that way. Versus in the earlier days, those folks that were those risk takers, the mavericks, the pioneers, that were deploying and doing it by the seat of their pants a bit more by then. So I think it's a natural progression around a market that then says right now, for the great masses that are on Main Street that are buying your technology, they have to be successful, and therefore they're thinking about software with a service, not just as a service.
Yep. I love what you said there because, funnily enough, Phil, our book, Closed Circuit Selling and Architecting a Predictable Revenue from an Unpredictable Market, we ran some comparisons in all the AIs. It actually said Crossing the Chasm was the most similar book.
Interesting. Yeah. I have been lucky enough through my day job to meet Geoffrey Moore about 3 times. And he has, I don't know, like 8 or 9 like really good books. Inside the Tornado and many more that you can see in the bookshelf behind me here. And he is an absolute gentleman and the most curious, humble, wants to know all about you and your job and where you live and your family and your pastimes and your career and all these things he wants to discuss with you before he's ready to start diving into his talk track about his books. And so, yeah, like a huge fan of Jeffrey Moore as a human, first of all, but also as a thought leader, like, secondly. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, we can appreciate the depth of those chasms as well. I'm
Yeah.
sure that George has told you about how many lunatic groups I was put in early for
Oh,
just
yeah.
speaking to fundamental pillars that you and I have just discussed here on a whole nother level today.
Yeah.
You and I see this as commercial common sense. I'm sure George does, also being an ex-lawyer, as commercial common sense, when we've now crossed the chasm of where business will also start realising it is commercial common sense. And where can we find more of what Adam and Phil have talked about here today? So I think
Yeah, for sure. Well, every pioneer, every creator is normally thought about that way as they're on the journey to convincing everybody that this is actually makes sense. It's what everyone needs, and then suddenly everyone starts adopting it as well. If my main competitor in my industry is doing that and using that tool or that framework, then I should too. Yeah, and so that's where the idea of being ubiquitous kind of comes from.
yeah, love it.
Phil, before we round out, you are the founding member of the Sydney chapter of the Revenue Enablement Society. Would
Yeah.
love for the listeners just to hear a little bit more about why you thought it was so important to bring that to Sydney, why you're involved, and why others should be involved too.
Yeah, it's an interesting journey. And so I do have like on my LinkedIn profile, and any of your listeners should reach out to me there and they'll find me there quite a lot. I do have this role that says I'm a founding member of the Revenue Enablement Society. It used to be called the Sales Enablement Society. We rebranded more recently because the audience that we serve tend to be CROs. They're our stakeholders as opposed to necessarily just a sales leader anymore. And understanding the difference in those two different titles and roles and their interest level. But I got involved because at the time there was two things going on for me. Number one, I was running sales enablement for Salesforce across the APAC region, and I was the only person like me. And I had a team of maybe 17 or 20 folks spread across ANZ and ASEAN and maybe Singapore and India. There was no one else like me, and I couldn't talk to anyone else about what are you guys doing for onboarding? How do you think about skills versus vertical development of your people? What about sales dev versus A's versus leaders? What about product versus skills versus acumen training? And so I couldn't talk to anybody else about how they were doing those things. And so I had definitely this sense of loneliness in my industry. The second thing was I was building the team and I'm trying to hire these people, and I could not find a sales enablement professional for love nor money in the open market. And I had to be very creative and go and look for people in different industries, different professions. Quite often they might be a marketing person or they might have been an ex-sales person. I had this kind of magic triangle of enablement, which was, at one point was, did they have enablement experience? Probably not. Did they have sales experience? Did they have Salesforce experience? And so normally they were on one side of that triangle, and I could then train them either on their sales knowledge or their enablement knowledge or their Salesforce knowledge to bring them into the middle of the triangle where I was. For a long time, I couldn't find great professionals. So I reached out to a few people I knew in the US and talked about it. They connected me with the original founders of the Enablement Society out of Washington, D.C., and connected me with those. And I found my tribe, I found my people, I feel seen. And I do remember the first chapter meeting we had in a small little upstairs room of a bar on Erston Street in Sydney. And there was maybe 8 or 9 of us. We brought like flip charts and we put some money behind the bar and we talked about how we do certain things, and it was phenomenal. And so suddenly I found people like me, and I found people that I wanted to work with or for, and I found people that would listen to me and empathize, and that wanted to hear from me as well. And I had this sense of belonging then. And so I think for that reason, I have been a member for, I guess, about 10 years now. I've co-led the chapter for Sydney as well for probably the last 3 or 4 years. And I love it. And I love the networking. It's how we all met. I don't know how that would have been facilitated otherwise. And I think it's a great opportunity to bring together people like-minded, that are open, that are curious, that are willing to challenge each other, that will discuss all these different topics in different ways, and are just out for each other. There's co-investment in people's success because we want this profession, this noble profession of enablement, to persist. And we don't want people leaving enablement to go back to marketing, to back to sales. We want them to stay, we want them to feel supported, we want them to feel that they have access to training, not just in their selling skills, but their enablement skills at the same time. So yeah, that's where it all came from. It's why I'm still so passionate about it all.
Love it.
Absolutely love it. Adam and I raved about the event that we attended, Phil, and I imagine the others are of that standard. And so I really encourage anyone listening or watching to check out the Revenue Enablement Society. Check out Phil Cleary on LinkedIn. Fortunately, he has a much easier name to spell than mine is, or Adam's last name is. So Phil Cleary, look him up on LinkedIn. Phil, before we round out the conversation, is there anything else that you would like to add?
I think that through the conversation that we've had, there's obviously always that art and science of selling, the art and science of forecasting, the art and science of enabling people, the art and science of coaching people. And I think understanding that and appreciation that there needs to be the science of the framework and the expectation and the rules and the constraints and the things we put in place, like some level of predictability, but that we have to layer on top of that level of art, of sense, of feeling, of touch, of identity, of my values, of what inspires me, of where I get my happiness, my joy, my sense of progress and fulfillment from. And so if you can marry those things together, you respect the science, but you invest in the art, I think that's what leads to success for anybody in the role that they're in. I had a big conversation with someone earlier today about the country of Bhutan, and that they have, instead of their GDP, this citizen happiness index. Can you imagine if companies not only wanted to understand how well is my team being successful sales-wise, revenue and customer retention and marketing pipeline and everything, but how happy and fulfilled are our employees? If I could put a number against that and truly invest in it, you would drive productivity, engagement, retention, loyalty from your employees. And guess what? That then pervades into the relationships they're having with their customers as well. And you end up with that loyalty then, both from the vendor to the buyer, but the buyer to the vendor as well. And I think that will go a long way to overcoming the very first thing we talked about, opportunities and deals getting moved out and kicked down the road, and why buyers are so nervous these days. And I think it's like, we're not sharing the happiness, we're not sharing like the joy in what we're doing and the success that we can bring for each other. If we were doing that, it would bring us a lot further along as a human race, as well as a set of business professionals.
Love it.
Yeah, that's a beautiful closing message. Phil Cleary, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate your time.
Awesome. Thank you guys. Pleasure.